Hi, everyone. Welcome to Build this afternoon. My name is Ethan Alter. I'm a senior writer with Yahoo Entertainment, here to talk about a new documentary. So, the golden age of Hollywood is synonymous with glitz and glamour, an era when larger-than-life stars like Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, and Bette Davis focused the public's eyes on Tinseltown. But you must remember this. Behind all the tinsel, those actors were just ordinary humans with ordinary human desires. Enter Scotty Bowers, a Marine-turned-gas station attendant who catered to those desires by arranging secret trysts for celebrities, trysts that he sometimes took part in himself. Those secrets are revealed at last in the new documentary, Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood, directed by our guest today, Matt Tyrnauer. It's currently playing in limited release, and the film profiles the now 95-year-old Scotty as he dishes on that vanished era of Hollywood and the people he knew and loved. Let's watch a clip from the movie, Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood.
Have you guys thought of doing something with that guy, Scotty Bowers?
Scotty was a revelation.
Scotty's a phenomenon.
Legend.
He serviced a lot of people.
That's what you call business, baby.
People are very invested in the establishment view of movie star history.
The strict moral code that we associate with Hollywood was a very traditional viewpoint. The movie stars were just good, honest, law-abiding citizens.
It turned out there was a whole alternate world to which most of us had no access or knowledge.
Scotty Bowers had this gas station, and he supplied men and women to the various Hollywood stars.
People disappearing up in a trailer and doing this and that. The whole thing was fun.
People wanted something, Scotty would get it.
Cole Porter would say, can you bring 15 guys, one right after the other? I fixed Katharine Hepburn up with every bit of 150 girls. I've been with Cary Grant, Rock Hudson, Charles Lawton. At Frank Sinatra's house, I had a three-way with Ava Gardner and Lana Turner.
There was a whole network of folks waiting for someone like Scotty to come along.
He wasn't simply this madam called for events.
Scotty's revealing that these people were real, flesh and blood like us.
It can add up to an awful lot of people, into the thousands.
I didn't know him then. I don't know him as that person. Not sure I want to.
I went in the Marine Corps in World War II.
Scotty was in horrific battles.
In Iwo Jima, we had 7,000 guys killed. It made me happy to be alive.
He's warm, he's caring. He likes to make people happy.
The world was different then.
If it became public that you were gay, you would be immediately fired.
They could go to jail. Scotty was able to allow these people to have lives.
Dr. Kinsey interviewed me, saying, you ever had sex with a girl? Yes. How about with a guy? Yes. Would you do everything? But somebody's flares think you're weird, you're different. I did the book to show that people are still people.
Don't you think you misled their trust by writing a tell-all book?
What's wrong with being gay? But thanks anyhow.
We are now embracing where the motto is do your own thing. Scotty was doing that when it was not culturally acceptable.
If it wasn't for this guy, I would have sank.
I often think back of how nice things were. I felt good that I made so many people happy.
Great. Well, welcome, Matt. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you.
I saw this documentary at the Toronto Film Festival last year and came away really enjoying it and loving especially the sort of double meaning, I think, of the title, Secret History, which we'll get to. I think it's talking about Hollywood both as a dream factory and as a city, the history of both of those things.
I agree with that.
But let's start with the dream factory idea. Now, you're an LA native, born and raised there. What's your, sort of your growing up, what do you remember about the place where you lived? Did you buy into the myth of it from the beginning?
Well, my father was a TV producer. He produced shows like Columbo. Yeah, I mean, the myth is alluring, even for the people in the industry. They buy into it. We all buy into it, I think. But when I became a journalist and filmmaker, I was very interested in showing alternate histories, and I realized there was a great deal going on that I didn't know about growing up there. Mm-hmm. One realizes that about LA, actually. If you really look closely, there's much more than meets the eye. So I think this is the ultimate more than meets the eye look at a secret world that was thriving in Los Angeles after the Second World War, all the way down to probably the 80s, before the LGBTQ movement became what we know it today.
Right. Do you remember specifically when sort of the cracks in LA's mythology started appearing to you? Did you pick up Hollywood Babylon, for example, and read that?
You know, my parents had Hollywood Babylon, so I was weaned on Hollywood Babylon. I think we all were, really. I mean, anyone who paid attention. Hollywood Babylon would sit on the bookshelf next to the reverent biographies of the movie stars, and it was really the only alternate history for a long time. Kenneth Anger is still alive, really deserves a lot of credit for that. I think this is a retake in a way, because Scotty Bowers, who's now 95 and ran this brothel to the stars out of a gas station in the center of Hollywood, was really present in the so-called imperial bedrooms of the city in a way that Kenneth Anger wasn't. Kenneth Anger was an alternative filmmaker. Scotty was welcomed in the greatest homes of the city, and specifically in the greatest bedrooms.
Scotty published his own memoir, Full Service, in 2012. Did you run out and buy it right away? Were you aware when it was coming out?
Well, I was given the manuscript. Okay. Gore Vidal, the great writer, was a client and friend of Scotty's. They met in 1947 at the mythical gas station. Now no longer mythical because we know it's true. But Gore helped him get the manuscript published. So when I made the deal with Scotty to make this movie, he had the manuscript, and Vidal helped get it published. Mm-hmm. Right. I read it then.
You read it then. What jumped out at you right away about it? What was the sort of the story that that summarized it for you, and why it was such a great piece?
Well, it's really in a perverse way a greatest generation narrative, but it's the part that the all-American boys left out of their post-war lives. He's the all-American boy. He enlisted in the Marines underage at 17. Mm-hmm. Fought in every battle, it seems, in the Pacific, came back to LA, but instead of going back to the farm in Illinois or getting a job at, Schwab's or something like that, he becomes a gas station attendant who's working double time as the manager of the Richfield oil station, but also the male madam to the stars. And in that, he meets everyone from every strata of life in Hollywood, from the gas station attendant, cum Marines, cum sex workers, who he was friends with, to people like Cary Grant, who went into the gas station for more than gas.
Mm-hmm. And we should say, seeing the stars out of that limelight, sort of in Ordinary Day, do you think he had a different perspective on them in that way? How did he see them differently than the rest of the world did?
Well, he's the least starstruck person I ever met. He had this farm boy perspective. He doesn't care for movies, really. Mm-hmm. He says he's seen 3 movies in his entire life. He's now seen this one about 10 times, so I guess he's seen 13 movies. But he was not really after anything other than being a worker and making people happy. He wasn't just a pump jockey and a male prostitute. Mm-hmm. He was a tree trimmer. He drove a taxi at one point. He would, fix the electricity in these people's homes, go Christmas shopping for them. He was the man of all work for a lot of really important people in, frankly, a very important city at the time, which had to have a covert sexual world when it came to same-sex relationships because of morals clauses in the contracts of the movie stars, which prevented them from being publicly anything other than straight, and also the Vice Squad, which was like a sexual Gestapo extorting famous people in the town if they dared to reveal anything other than a sham marriage to the public.
Right. Some of the most explosive details, probably for people who love to buy into the myth, is about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn specifically. Right. I mean, for years it's always endured that they were this sort of great romance, even though he left his wife for her, and so that there was always that element of it too. But this sort of explores the fact that both of them were gay and had to keep that hidden, and that's I think details that people have trouble reconciling in some ways.
Well, Hepburn and Tracy are one of the great Hollywood legends. Hepburn herself helped to propagate the myth after Tracy's death. You see that a little bit in the movie. We have corroboration in the movie for Hepburn's lesbianism. Liz Smith, who was the greatest gossip columnist and very respected, truthful journalist, knew Hepburn very well and confirms that she had lesbian relationships. Spencer Tracy, George Cukor, the great director, put Spencer Tracy up in his guest house. The secretaries of Cukor confirmed that Tracy was having a relationship with Scotty. Scotty confirms it. Right. Why people hold on to these myths is an interesting question. Why does it damage the standing of Hepburn and Tracy to know that they were anything other than straight? Maybe they were bisexual. Maybe they were gay on Tuesday and straight on Wednesday. Who knows? I mean, that's really not as interesting to me as the fact that they had to make up a story, a cover story, in order to survive, and we need to know that, and we need to know about the straight washing that occurred habitually in the power corridors of our world.
Right. And certainly, I mean, people have been angry at Scotty for sharing these details. He was claiming he's profiting off the dead and things like that. I mean, when people have approached you about that, what's sort of your response to that?
Well,
Joe?
Cary Grant, for example, is a person of world importance still. He's an immortal Hollywood legend. There have been many biographies written about Cary Grant. So you could argue that a biographer who writes a biography about Cary Grant's, several marriages is profiting off the dead as well. Why? Just because he had a homosexual relationship or 2 or 3 or 12, does that mean that you're profiteering off of him? That's homophobia, really. It's homophobia masked as pearl clutching and shock at anything abnormal happening. Well, what, as Scotty eloquently says in the movie, what's wrong with being gay? Why is it so shocking that someone, no matter who they are, had a homosexual relationship? Dr. Kinsey told us this happened in the Kinsey Report in the 50s. Why are we still clinging to these myths that we were fed by, the church, our parents, whomever? It's sort of alarming to me, actually, that it's still coming up. And I think this makes Scotty into kind of a visionary, and that who told him that all this was cool way ahead of his time? Now people are interested in sexual fluidity and aren't into gender labels or sexuality labels. Scotty is 95, and he was getting that in the 1940s. So I think there's something to be said for that, and I think he's someone to look at and look to as an example.
Right. Do you sort of feel, I mean, obviously the generational divide is there from people who remember these actors when they were young and growing up watching them. For younger people who maybe don't know who they are or don't mind the stories behind them, are they as fascinated in history? Do you feel like watching it with young people, exposing this era makes them more relatable?
I made the movie in part for younger generations so they could see the struggles that people had to go through. And appreciate that if you're an LGBTQ person today, you stand on the shoulders of people that came before you, and that we really need to know our history. We need to know about the bad old days, but we need to know a nuanced portrait of them. Not everything was horrible. Scotty was very happy. There were a lot of people that were living true lives then, but they had to, in his words, play it cool. We don't have to do that so much anymore, at least in big cities. But I don't think a lot of people realize that you could be ruined by your own police force just for being gay, and that they could extort you and shake you down for that. That was the LAPD. It wasn't some obscure, defunct agency that, stopped existing. It's the LA Police Department. They did that. And I'm happy to call them out on it 50, 60 years after the fact.
Right. Do you see a connection between the film's premiered to Toronto before the Me Too movement really kicked in, but do you sort of feel that there's a connection between the truths that Scotty is telling and the truths that are coming out now in the present day? It's very different in terms of what people are being accused of, but the idea of showing what's happening behind the scenes. I
think it's kind of apples and oranges. I think people are being accused of something that is non-consensual now. As far as I've been able to determine from everything anyone's told me, this was the picture of consensuality. I've spoken to probably a dozen people who were in their 80s and 90s and were around. No one's told me anything untoward or anything that even approaches something non-consensual. And everyone's spoken admiringly of Scotty. So I think it's not quite the comparison.
Right. Scotty can be certainly a big talker in the movie. It's seriously, he's very exuberant. He has these great stories. Did you ever have the sense that he was exaggerating? Was there any sense that ever have a sense that there was a tall tale happening for you?
A tall tale in terms of a fib, no.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about 90 years of history here almost. I mean, I wasn't there for the whole 90 years, so I don't know if any story has changed, but I think that everything is, in essence, very truthful. I've cross-checked, cross-tabulated facts. You can look at the fact pattern as it appears in the record in anything from Wikipedia to other biographies to people's diaries. Cecil Beaton, the great photographer and art director's diaries, the Noel Coward diaries. Photographic records of where people were at particular times, people who appear in film and photographs of Hollywood premieres, and other people in the background who are actually present in Scotty's life. You can check it out, and it all checks.
Yeah. Did he tell you any stories that you were really blown away by, something that you had never really had heard before?
I mean, there are things of such extremity that it was a real learning experience for me. I think this is why Dr. Kinsey interviewed him so much, because Kinsey was interested in data that people were afraid to give him, so he could have a full picture of what was happening behind the scenes in the realm of human sexuality. Scotty was unabashed. I mean, there are really wild scenarios happening. If we think that our ancestors were prudish, I think again. I mean, there was one actor of a great film noir actor named John Dahl, who was being hung upside down from trees in the canyons of LA during thunderstorms, which I didn't know was a fetish, by the way, but that's a new one. And there were many new ones that Scotty did tell me. The movie doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you a lot, and there's no shortage of humanity in it, but also there's plenty of sex.
And certainly, I mean, Scotty emerges as this really complex human figure as well. He has his own history of childhood sexual trauma, or abuse, although he doesn't claim to be a victim at all, which is interesting. I don't know if you felt that was a cover story, or not a cover, but if he was, again, sort of adapting that pose, or if he really didn't feel any trauma from those days.
Well, it's Scotty's story, and it's his life to tell about. He talks about situations as a very young man having sex with older people, which most people would immediately say, well, that's child abuse. I question him on it in exactly those terms. And he immediately, on multiple occasions, says no. He does not feel like a victim. This is a very unusual stance to take, but it's something that he believes very deeply. It's his truth. It's his story to tell. It's a cinéma-vérité film. So I let him tell his story, and I'll let the viewer decide whether they are disapproving, approving, shocked, or otherwise.
Speaking to the other meaning of the title, Secret History, one of the things I really love about the movie is you watch him drive around Los Angeles, and his version of LA is gone. It's history. It doesn't exist, but he knows where those places are. Like the things that are something else now, he knows what they used to be, and that's the secret history portion. He's the sort of key to unlocking this past of LA that isn't there anymore.
Yeah, you know, I grew up in Los Angeles, and Sunset Boulevard on the west side of LA, people used to always tell me there was a bridle path down the middle of Sunset Boulevard, which I lived a half a mile from. And some people who were older told me we used to ride our horses to school every morning. And then I looked out my window one day, we lived in a canyon, down into a riding stable that was just about 50 feet from Sunset Boulevard. The riding rink was where the horses would be tied up when they would ride their horses to school. So I began to see, as a young guy in LA, if you look closely, there was evidence of a hidden past, of a almost forgotten past. And this movie is really my tribute to that Los Angeles. Scotty is a living monument to that past. And to drive around town with him, he can show you where everything was, and he frequently does, and it's fascinating to hear. But I've always thought that Los Angeles was an Easter egg hunt, and there was a hidden history, a secret history, and this movie, more than just a revisiting of the sexual history of hidden Hollywood, is really an exploration of a lost city.
Right, yeah. And also just the other image that sticks with me is him in his garage that have been transformed into these libraries full of just information that people aren't looking for them, but he has them. He has this stuff just buried in what is an ordinary garage. It's actually a treasure trove of artifacts.
Well, the history of gay Los Angeles, and almost gay any city, obscures itself. Certainly in the past it did, because it was just too risky to be overt about it. Scotty is a great collector of things, to say the least. So in his hoarder's dens and storage units, we found really hundreds of photographs of, again, the secret city, the secret history of LA. Photographs of the gas station boys and one girl, and Scotty himself posing in risque photographs, and even matchbook covers to gay bars that everyone had all but forgotten, and he had it all squirreled away. No one would know that unless it fell into the right hands, so I'm glad we were able to find it.
This quote that sort of came to mind to me, and it may sound melancholy, but I don't. But Scotty isn't. So, but the line from Barry Lyndon that they are all equal now. The last line, the idea that at one point these secrets meant something, and now they're just everyone's sort of where they are where they are. So.
Well, there's also near the end of Barry Lyndon, you hear ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and we are all equal, which I think is the message of the movie.
Right. What's interesting is your next movie is a documentary about Studio 54, and that whole cycle, that place lived out in a very public eye. So you're going from a private, secret Hollywood to a story of New York that was very public. Was that an interesting transition?
Well, this is the secret history of Studio 54, really, in a lot of ways. Ian Schrager, who is the co-founder with Steve Rubell, who died, unfortunately, from HIV-related illness in the 80s. Schrager, still going strong, tells the story from his point of view. So that's woven into the film, and he's never told it before. So you really get a point of view on this club, and we also found, that you've never seen, and we also found hours of 16mm film footage shot inside that literally was not developed. So you really see this mythic place from an angle that no one has seen it before.
Right. Since you divide your time sometimes between LA and New York, is there a difference that you see in the two cities and their approach to their history and how they sort of function that way?
Yeah, I lived in New York for a long time, now back in Los Angeles. New York has gotten a lot better at venerating and preserving its history. I mean, the past 50 years have been years of preservation and great consciousness. Los Angeles, which I love, has a much more throw-down attitude toward its history. It's a 20th century city. The 20th century is the century of disposable fast food containers and also disposable history, which is very sad. This movie is an attempt to correct that a little bit. But again, in Los Angeles, part of its charm is you can see the history if you look closely. And I think there's a certain wonderful thing to that. When I was growing up, the Neutra and Schindler, all these modern houses that are so venerated now, were falling apart and being torn down, and no one cared about them. And suddenly, in the 90s, people started to restore them. And now they're the most prized homes in the city. Things move in cycles. I think that we're on a great upswing for LGBTQ rights. I think Scotty is an emblem of that. So let's hope that upswing continues. But I think we need to be reminded that there was a dark past. And the more we know about that, the more we can prevent future generations from having to suffer the way our ancestors and people in our past did.
Right, keeping quiet. You mentioned that Scotty has seen this movie 10 times now. So has it jarred any other memories loose? That is he eager to do a second one or a follow-up?
I think he would. I'm not sure we could. It took 3 years to get this one done. He has such a great memory, but one thing leads to another sometimes, and people who were very famous weren't mentioned during the 2 years we were filming because something reminds him. He's not one of those people when you ask him, well, tell me about Gary Cooper and John Wayne, were they gay? He doesn't say that at all. I mean, he's not going to give you John Wayne's life as a drag queen. It just doesn't happen. So it's not as if everyone had a secret gay past, but some people just aren't famous anymore, and they were incredibly famous in his time. And when they come up, you do hear interesting stories. So for every name in the movie, I'd say there are 10 that are not mentioned. And LA had a really rich history. It was the cradle of the gay rights movement, really. Really even more so than New York and San Francisco. People forget that as well. Right. Scotty, I think, was an unsung hero of that time.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's turn it over to the audience for some questions.
Hi. You mentioned your father being like a filmmaker around this relative era of Hollywood, and I was just wondering how that affected you on a personal level, or how the story was meant to be told.
Well, my father was a TV writer and producer. At that time, TV was the second class, the second tier. It was called the business, and the film business was called the industry. It was very distinct. However, the kind of shows he wrote, which was Columbo, for example, or Murder, She Wrote was another one, those were the shows that actually had the old actors on as guest stars because they couldn't get work in movies. So I had an interesting perspective on the old history because he was very interested in it. And I think I got a lot of this from him. He had the Hollywood Babylon book. I think I was probably, in the 3rd grade when that was published. What does a 3rd grader make of Hollywood Babylon? But you can kind of get it from the pictures. So I think all of this was these seeds were planted for me at the time. And I really do see this film as my Los Angeles film. I think it has allusions to one of my favorite movies, Shampoo, which I think is one of the great LA films. And if you look at the Warren Beatty character in Shampoo and you imagine him not as a kind of vehemently heterosexual character, but as someone that's a little more flexible, I think Shampoo could almost be a movie about Scotty Bowers. And that we even did some shots in the film that were alluding to Shampoo up in the canyons because there's so many great shots of Beatty in the canyons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. So the industry and society's changed a lot since Scotty's time, and it's really interesting to hear about this secret history. What do you think decades from now will be the secret history of Hollywood today?
Oh, that's one I haven't been asked before. Well, who knows? I mean, that's why it's secret right now. I mean, maybe crazy polymorphous things are happening, and we'll want to know about them. There is a bit of straight washing happening still in our world. Some alleged film scholars have spoken up against this movie, saying that these shenanigans, so-called, of movie stars really are not relevant. And someone said, I prefer to look at their work on screen. Well, that's fine. I mean, we should look at their work on screen. But when someone survives the test of time, the legacy of Grant and Hepburn is coming on a century now. We can't have biographies of them being cleansed of information. So the marriages of Cary Grant, which were promoted by the studios, are in the record, but the other relationships, significantly one with Randolph Scott, who was another major star, is bleached out. So this is a corrective to that. Someone survives the test of time from today and there's something obscure, I'm sure eventually we'll know that as well. LA is consequential because the studios really conspired to create an image that they sent around the world, and it took. So this heteronormative idea, this kind of white picket fence, Andy Hardy, meet cute world of Hollywood was foisted on us, and we took it hook, line, and sinker. We can't, and shouldn't do that anymore.
It's almost hard to imagine there being a secret history of Hollywood now, given the way everyone lives their lives very much in public.
Well, yeah, it's true with Instagram and Tumblr. I guess there are no secrets at that level, but I'm sure we'll find some other ones.
They'll turn up on Snapchat. The archives will show up at one time. Great. Well, thank you so much to our guest Matt Tyrnauer today for tuning in, for coming by. Make sure Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood is in theaters now, limited release, and Studio 54 is coming out later this year. So thanks very much, everyone.